Thank you, Warwick Business School, for having me, and all you for being here on a Friday evening. I'm very impressed. Listen, yes, that book is Gaucho Dialogues on Leadership and Management. And given the difficulties of Dimitris in pronouncing gauchos, I may think I should have chosen a different name for the book, but it's too late. It came out last week, so it's out there. I didn't bring a copy, sorry. But it's a book that I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed it very, very much. It's a fun book. It's a book of management, but I wrote it with delight. So I just used these two gauchos, which are American cowboys, Latin American cowboys, to discuss what they saw as they were observing Latin American revolutions. We had many of them in the 19th century. Some of them lasted 10 years, more than corporations can last. So why not study them as cases? How did these people lead their followers? Sometimes for 10 years, as I said, without paying a salary. And these were columns on the move, they were expanding. So how did they secure the logistics necessary for them to work? How did these leaders assess performance? How do they reward? How do they punish? These were all decisions that are typical of a good manager. So I wanted to know how these people behaved and led their own followers before Harvard Business got in the way. Right? And taught us how to manage, really in a way that is not as successful in managing our own people. Now, it is focused on Latin America, yes, but Latin America is a good example of a collectivist society. Like perhaps 4/5 of mankind. We are not individualists, we work on teams. Our identity is derived from the groups that we belong to. Very much like in Africa, the Middle East, perhaps all Southern Europe, and much of Asia. Therefore, that what I analyze for Latin Americans may be relevant for many other countries. But if you ask me, why is it that I studied this? Because what we need is at least a better understanding of why Latin America has lagged behind the regional leader for over 100 years. That is the big question. The US is the leader, and it's been a leader for over a century. And Latin Americans have not been able to catch up. Why? There's no purpose of answering the simple questions. You have to at least try to answer the big questions, and that is a big one. Why is it that we are not as productive as we could be? Were we never as productive? No, that's wrong. Just think of the Portuguese and the Spanish navigators. They set off from Iberia after the same history, intolerant history, reclaiming their land from the Muslims. But when they got to the corner of their own countries, there was nowhere else to go. But they were still soldiers and intolerant. And they had to find a new way to the Indies, because Constantinople had fallen to the Muslims 53 years before. So what these people did was, well, let's follow the way to the Indies, China. They knew it was somewhere on the east. So the Portuguese navigated south, around Africa. And if you didn't have the world map, as they didn't then, you knew it was to the east, but you didn't really know when to make a left turn. So whenever the Portuguese found a big river on their left, they sailed in. Said, this must be it. Until they reached some waterfall and they had to come back. And some of these rivers, they have inscribed on the waterfalls, chiseled on stone, this is not the way. On the year of the Lord, right, we arrived here and this is not the way, so go back. And they would go back to near Lisbon and they would report these on logbooks. And they kept trying for 90 years. Now, 90 years at that time was almost 3 generations. So you had to have good schools, good documents to record, and the sailors to learn. And eventually, they did. Now, the interesting thing is, when Vasco da Gama made that turn and got to Calicut in India, he discovered the way to India. And he inserted Portugal into a chain of commerce that was coming all the way from China and Japan, through the Arabias, into Europe. He just cut it short. Filled his boats with the goods that he had or wanted to take back, and went back to Lisbon and said, I found it. It turns out that Christopher Columbus had joined the Portuguese before, but got fed up. And he went back and said, listen, these guys are dead wrong. They'll never make it. And so he went to the kings of Spain and said, listen, give me your support and I'll find a better way. And he hit the Americas before Vasco da Gama actually hit India. But he came back with 2 parakeets and a couple of Indians, what he thought were Indians. And said, I've got there, I went there. Well, where are the goodies? So, eventually we'll find them. No, he never did. But he had discovered America. Now, the fact that he could not find the way to India is, in my point of view, crucial to understand Latin America. Because he did not have the benefit that the Portuguese had of inserting Spain into a chain of world commerce. So he continued being aristocratic and belligerent. This is what aristocrats do, right? They expand. Take it all home. And so what happened was that Spain continued being what it used to be. And when it eventually found gold, no goods to trade, because there were none, but when they found gold, they would just take it away. And with that, they financed their expansion where they wanted to expand, which was in Europe. But they never became merchants. And that is a crucial difference. Because aristocrats seek winner-takes-all solutions. Merchants seek win-win solutions. Has to be good for you, has to be good for me. So what's the fair price? If I shoot you, the next time, anybody that knows that story will just hide when I come back. So I will not be able to continue with that trade. So it has to be good for me and good for you. And it's this attitude that the Brazilians inherited from the Portuguese, a negotiator's behavior. Brazilians do not confront. Brazilians seek the middle way. They won't even confront you at work. So if you're going to go through a multinational to Brazil, you're going to expect to give people feedback. No. It doesn't work that way because they really don't want to offend you. Right? And they feel very offended if you give them feedback in the straightforward book that American textbooks recommend. I can see that you're understanding what I'm saying, huh? Yes, you come from what?
My heritage is from Hong Kong.
From Hong Kong, that's right, precisely. Huh? A collectivist culture. You seek harmony. You don't seek confrontation. So Brazilians have a hard time in dealing with other Latin Americans, Spanish-speaking Latin Americans, because the other Spanish-speaking Latin Americans are the heirs of the Spanish aristocrats, which have always sought winner-takes-all solutions. And if you don't believe me, just think what's going on today in Catalonia, in Spain. Right? I mean, it's the same thing. The spokesperson of the current Spanish government issued a declaration a couple of months ago that was fantastic, even before the Catalonia problem. He said, hey, listen, we don't need to win by knockout. you know the boxing thing, I knock out meaning I lie you flat for over 10 seconds. It's not necessary to win by knockout. As if every Spanish thought that it is necessary to knock out the other one. Well, to give you an example, Brazil has a neighbor, a weaker neighbor called Paraguay, and the river that separates them is called the Paraná River, which during the rainy season it runs very high, but during the low season some little spots of higher ground on the seabed turn up, and the Paraguayans would say, hey, those islands are mine. But the Brazilians, say, hey, they'll disappear with the next flood, so why worry about them? Oh, no, they're mine. No, they're neither yours nor mine, they'll disappear. Now, this had been going on now for too many years. And as I told you, Brazilians seek harmony. They didn't want to give something that was not theirs, actually. So they offered this solution. Listen, Paraguayans, let's build a dam. One day, when possible, when we've got the money, let's build a dam downstream high enough to flood the whole thing, and those islands will never turn up again. Now you would think, hey, did the Paraguayans buy it? Well, they didn't. But the Brazilians said, one day we'll be able to generate electricity from those dams, and we will split it half and half. And that, believe it or not, is the origin of the largest hydroelectric dam in the world, Itaipu. It is the result of a border conflict. And it was offered as a solution 16 years before Brazil even knew how to transmit that amount of electricity to São Paulo, and they didn't even need it then. But they eliminated the bone of contention, which were those islands that would disappear and reappear and disappear, right? Hey, let's do away with the problem. Now, you may think, what has this got to do with business? Well, I tell you, everything. Because when you go out there and you have to negotiate salaries, promotions, business deals, you're going to have to deal with either Brazilians or Spanish-speaking Latin Americans. And you better know the difference. And it doesn't come easy, but you have to learn, and fast. I have studied the differences to see if what I'm telling you now has any business significance. And it's hard to figure out, to measure this proclivity to confrontation. So what I did is I studied the words of the national anthems of all these countries and sought to find out the proportion, the share of aggressive words like death, violence, blood in those national anthems. Now, national anthems are quite telling, particularly in Latin America, because they, our political regimes have changed quite frequently, quite quickly. We've been to democracy, military dictatorship, whatever, but the anthems remain the same. So I found out that Brazilian anthem is a song to beauty. It refers to the beauty of our rivers, of nature, the sun that we have, the songs of our birds. Very few aggressive words. But if you travel south, and the further south you go to Uruguay. Uruguayans speak Spanish, they're far more aggressive in their national anthem. Argentinians, even more aggressive by the share of aggressive words in their anthems. Now, does this have a reflection on the way that people behave? Well, it sure does. But how did I measure it? By the amount of people that they killed during the period that we had military dictatorships in all these countries during the Cold War. We all had military dictatorships, and people were killed or disappeared. And for each Brazilian killed or disappeared, adjusted for the size of the population, for every Brazilian dead or disappeared, the Argentinians killed 74. 1 against 74. So tell me, doesn't that sort of illustrate a difference in aggressiveness? Now, why is this relevant to you? Because Brazil is large and many countries will set up business in Latin America and they will say, well, listen, we'll start with Latin America and then we'll expand. And we'll manage all the other countries from our little guy in São Paulo. But it turns out that they're not the same people. And that when Brazilians try to manage Argentinians, from the Argentinian point of view, they sound too soft. Hey, I can fool this guy. I'll say yes, but I won't do it. And the Brazilian tries to get substance out of it, but he doesn't really know how to, because he doesn't come through as aggressive enough. Right? At the same time, when a Brazilian corporation expands from Brazil, they have to deal with the other Spanish-speaking Latin Americans. And usually a Brazilian will tell you, I can't trust these guys. But why can't you trust them? Well, because they don't tell me anything. Well, they are very hierarchical societies. And you know, in hierarchical societies, you don't come up with bad news very easily. So I know this Brazilian company, very large, it's invested $1.5 billion in a neighboring country, but they don't know what really is going on. So they asked me, Alfredo, what's going on here? Well, I tell you, you will never know. So you better set up an alternative channel of communications. Go to the universities, hire anthropologists to work in the areas where you're working, and every 3 months have dinner with them and ask them what's going on. Because if you ask your own line managers to tell you, they won't. And you will be the last one to know. But if you ask an independent person that doesn't owe anything to you, you know, a young student, anthropologist, just wants to get on with his dissertation and get out of there, they have no reason to lie. And they can tell you, listen, this is going on. But you don't even need to go all the way to the hinterland in the Pacific to learn this. We had a large paper manufacturer in Brazil that had Norwegian investment into it, and they had what we'd call a land problem with our natives, you know, Brazilian natives, people that were there before the Europeans came up. And, you know, this paper company had thought that they had bought the land, but, you know, these natives never sell their land, right? They take you the money, but, you know, the land is still mine. I mean, come on. This is the land of my ancestors, the birds, the fish. What do you want to own here, right? You're nuts. So you always had this conflict that was recurrent. And this company had gone to the courts, and now the courts to higher courts, and finally, the Supreme Court of Justice of Brazil ruled, not surprisingly, in favor of this company. Now, when the news got to the line front, where the factory was actually working with the natives, the field manager got his truck and razed the huts of the Indians. Now get away because this land is ours. The Supreme Court had said so. So all the Indians with their babies and families and whatever had to run away. Well, they won the first round. But the second round was played in New York in the stock exchange, under the auspices of the non-governmental organizations that support the livelihood of the Indians. And with films, they showed what was going on. The huts of the natives being razed by this company that had Norwegian and American investment in it. So guess what happened? Divestment immediately. The Norwegian crown said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. They started selling their shares. The shares of this Brazilian company plummeted. The CEO was expelled. Now, these are stories of cross-cultural management that I want to sensitize you to, because they have a very specific meaning. I mean, they're fun to learn, they're interesting, but at the same time, they have a local significance that is crucial for foreign managers to understand. So if you ask me, why have we lagged behind for over 100 years? And I had to sum it up is because we're being managed in a way that we don't really understand. We are not Americans. Management is mostly American-based. Now, that management, which has been so effective for America, is not really even an American invention. Did you know that? No? Oh, listen, I'll tell you a short story then. I love telling stories. There was a French armorist that 200 years after Gutenberg came up with a simple idea. Hey, you know, we can't carry on having this apprentice-based system in which one person learns how to make a whole musket. Remember the muskets? They were filled up from the top. Because this person had to learn metallurgy for the barrel, carpentry for the rest of the thing, soft metallurgy for the spring and the trigger. So it took too long. But this armorist came up with the idea, originally from Gutenberg, interchangeable parts, only 200 years later. The French are rather slow. But he came up with this idea and said, we would be far more effective if we trained people to specialize in producing parts, to assemble them later. And if they broke down in battle, we would not have to throw the whole musket away. We could just put in spare parts, designed to fit. Now, this, for a feudal aristocratic France, meant too much trouble. So they said no. But guess who was there when the idea was brought up? Ambassador of the US to France, Thomas Jefferson. So it pays to have a good ambassador, remember. Pay your taxes and make sure that these guys, the good guys, are there. Because Jefferson said, hey, that's what we need in the US. So he brought the idea back. He couldn't bring Honoré Blanc, the armorist, because, you know, France was France, it was beautiful, and the US was a bit of a jungle. So the armorist said, no, I'm not going. But he took the idea to the States, and he gave it to the cotton gin inventors, Eli Whitney, with a commission, 10,000 muskets. Well, Eli Whitney did not manage to produce the 10,000 muskets, but he produced quite a few. And the idea caught on. And it moved for the manufacture of locks, then to watches, then to sewing machines, then to locomotives, and the rest is history. It fit the US better because the US did not have apprentices as well trained as Europe did. So the level of education of the Americans then, being lower, only allowed them to focus on specialization of simple tasks. And they should be managed to put those tasks together. Now, it worked so wonderfully for that society that during the First World War, a French general came up to the Americans and asked them for help to produce a 155mm recoil cannon with which they could defeat the Germans. They had invented this recoil cannon. Now, mind you, I don't want to take much of your time, but cannons, before they were recoiled, that is, before they used the energy that projected the bullet to expel the cartridge, load it again, and get ready to fire, before that, you had to aim a cannon, load it, fire it, and the whole thing would jump all over the place. And you had to secure it back again, aim it again, and then fire. So it took too long. With a recoil cannon, the French believed that they could fire 5 rounds of ammunition for every one of the standard cannon. But they could not produce enough recoil cannons as fast as they needed. So they went to the US, said, can you help us? And guess who came up? The Dodge brothers of the car industry. And they looked at the problem and said, we can do it. You know, General Foch looked at them and said, well, we might as well give them a try. Otherwise, we're at a loss in any case. But the Dodge brothers produced so many cannons that the French had to ask them to stop. And they won the war. And General Foch came back, now a marshal, Maréchal Foch, came back to the US to thank the Americans for the help during the war. And he asked the Dodge brothers, how did you do it? Well, we did it by reverse engineering. We broke up your cannon, trained our people to produce small parts, assembled them together and shipped them off to you. Exactly the idea that had been rejected almost 150 years before by the French. And had been rejected because the managerial idea did not match the French culture, but did match the American culture. And it worked wonders in America, though not in France. So what today we recognize as the American system of manufacture is no less than a French idea. Isn't it amazing? But it also illustrates that what works in America might not work as well in Latin America. So what I feel as a Latin American, trying to be managed as if I were an American myself, I feel very much like those 6 authors in the play of Pirandello. 6 authors in search of, 6 characters in search of an author. Bursting to come to life if they only could find a proper script. But if you don't give people the right script, they won't be able to act. If you give them an American script to behave as if they were Americans, hey, it won't come out naturally. So what I use as a counterexample is a Brazilian Samba school. You've probably seen them on carnival time, you know, these beautiful parades there, occasionally with beautiful women, but you know, don't look only at the women and the few beautiful men that come out as soloists in those parades. Those parades have 4,000 people in them who moonlight for a year to produce a world-class show for no pay. How is it that they do it? With passion, yes, but responding to a local-styled leadership. They engage in producing that because they love it. And as I've asked them with my wife here, Luli, who supports me in all the work that I do, I've asked them, hey, listen, but aren't you stressed out at times? Yes, of course we're stressed out. But why do you do it? Because here, you know, we have love. Isn't it beautiful? They love each other. They trust each other. They love working each other. That integration is what helps them work as teams. So rather than you selecting individuals as you would by American management, you know, how does an American corporation do? I hope you get chosen, right? Sorry, what's your name? Hessel. Hessel. Now, you answer an ad to a multinational, and you are selected as the best for that purpose. Now, if you operate in a society where people trust each other, even though they might not know you, Hazel, you will be able to be effective. But if you're put in a place where people don't trust you because they're not trusting, no matter how good you are, it will take you a few months to work effectively in that team. Now, 35% of Americans will tell you that they trust people who they don't know. It's not like that in Latin America. We are not a trusting society. You can get the best Hazel appointed to a position and it won't work. So how does a Samba school get organized? Can I have here. I don't want to spoil your beautiful screen, so I'll write here. No, where can I write? Oh, here. Now, a Samba school, just imagine it's like a fishbone structure, right? Here you have the head, usually the owner of the Samba school. Can be a woman. Yes. I worked for 2 years inside a Samba school that was led by a woman. Now, wow, she was very powerful, right? But she had the idea. She ran the thing. And so what does she do? She collects talents. Now, some of these may be dancers, right? Some of these make costumes. Some of these play. But they get organized in wings. So when you look at a Samba school, and you see those parading, you will realize that there's blocks of people that are dressed in the same costumes. About 150 of them each, because each one of them gets organized into an alignment decided by the head of the Samba school. So the great idea of this head of a Samba school is to select the right leaders for each of those wings. Now, those leaders may have not much schooling. I've known them. Could be taxi drivers, plumbers, electricians. Good to lead people. They won't get into a multinational, but they're bloody good. They know their job. They organize their people. They keep them on Facebook, WhatsApp. They have groups. They know when somebody's being born, when somebody has died, when somebody's out of a job, and they help them to get a new job. They keep these networks alive throughout the year. Some of these are not even, they don't belong to the Samba school, in the sense that some of these can be groups who have one leader who has sold this team to the Samba school. 150. I'll bring you 150 people that will do anything for you. Okay, fine. So he gets paid for that. Now, what is the beauty of it is that you have people who trust a leader, not necessarily the big leader, but their leader, the one that they know, the one that they trust. And they will work for this person. So the big secret is how is it that groups of people, of these 150, which are groups as well, are groups of friends like their neighbors. They work together in an office. They know each other from the bar in the corner. Groups of 5 or 10 flock into each one of these wings and surrender their identity for the benefit of a larger organization. Now, if you can get that to work, you're going to get a hell of an effective company. But remember, if you ask people to assess performance, you should only ask the performance of the leaders, because the rest have only done what the leader has told them to do. So why are you going to bother asking an individual how well they've worked? Because this individual has only done what he was expected to do by their boss.